Welcome inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller and Jeff Nowak wishing you a Merry Christmas, everybody. What was it already? Their shirts out in the locker room. It didn't take long.
Yeah, apparently, I asked if they had got, how did they get them so fast? They had them. I think they had them from last year, as a joke, because Riz was the word of the year last year. But yeah, it's basically just a shirt with Santa Claus on it, wearing stunning shades. But hey, if you got the shirt, wear it.
And yeah, he's got to love it. Obviously, just coming in as the interim coach for this Black and Gold bunch, trying to snap a 7-game losing streak. And at least you can see and feel that, I don't know, this change the players are definitely embracing.
The players are happy.
Yeah, right.
And it's been kind of a weird dynamic over the last few days. I think that's part of the reason they didn't have an open locker room period on Monday like they typically would. They sent Tyron Matthew and Foster Moore to the podium. Because I do think it's a balance you have to strike where, yes, the players are, they didn't hate DA. I think they just didn't want to play for him anymore. But he's a liked guy. And so you want to strike this balance of man, we feel bad for him. This is our fault. We are the ones who got him fired. But also we are very excited for going a different direction. And that's kind of what we've heard of this. They really like Rizzi. And we're going to talk more about this. This first segment, I want to get into some of the news that's happened. We're going to do kind of a rundown, talk about activation periods and some signings, a coaching change, kind of not entitled, but there has been a change that's worth talking about. We're going to talk about Marshon Lattimore. We posted podcast feed yesterday, kind of breaking that down. So we're not going to talk about kind of the breaking news of it all. We can kind of get into what that's going to mean for the cornerback group, what that's going to mean from an asset perspective, and what that's going to mean from a cap perspective. And Mike Detillier had a good bite breaking it down, so we'll play you that. Also want to get into a report from Ross Jackson on Kendre Miller, which I think
there's someone who didn't like DA.
Yeah, right. And he was more than ready to shell out some info on that whole thing. And it's interesting. And that was kind of what I thought might be happening. And so we'll get into that. Second segment, I want to dive fully into the Mickey Loomis interview that we had on WWL. I know he also talked to New Orleans About Football yesterday, but we're going to talk about what he said to Mike Haas on WWL. A lot of interesting quotes. It's become it's very clear that he, if it was up solely to him, Dennis Allen would still be the head coach right now. So we'll talk about that. Final segment, I want to talk about the changes. And some of them have been nominal. Some of them have been more significant, like reorganizing the locker room. But we'll get into a lot of that and hear from Derek Carr, hear from Darren Rizzi on why these changes felt necessary, what they mean, why they can change things up, and just give a different perspective on how this season could go forward, and why I think people feel a lot more positive about, without really anything changing from a results perspective. You can already tell there's just a level of positivity around this team. So we'll talk about that and also kind of make the case for, before anything gets started here, before we play a single game in the Darren Rizzi head coaching tenure, making the case for why he could potentially and why it might make the most sense for him to keep this job beyond this year. And we'll have to see how it goes, but I just want to kind of make the statement for why that could happen, and we'll go from there. But first things first, let's just talk about the initial injury report, which I felt was pretty positive. You still don't have guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry. Marshon Lattimore's gone now, so you don't have to worry about that in terms of health. Cedric Wilson, shoulder injury, he's out. Chris Olave, concussion, he's out, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then Lucas Patrick, he is out with an ankle injury. Other than that, 5 guys limited: JT Gray, Rico Payton, Jamal Williams, John Ridgeway, Will Harris, who's they've opened his practice window, and then 4 guys full: Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, and then Shane Lemieux, Nephi Sewell, who are also in the kind of return to practice window for the IR stints. It's the first full practices for Derek Carr or Alvin Kamara, as far as I can recall, since their respective injuries. So from a health perspective, I feel like things are headed in the right direction.
And with Carr, I thought it was odd. It's not an oblique injury that he's even listed as full with. It's illness.
Yeah, I thought that was strange too. I meant to ask him about it when he was speaking, but I forgot. But one of the interesting things that's happened, and so we went into the practice, and you've been to these open practices, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that always happens is you walk in there, and basically you're watching stretching, and maybe a few positional drills after that. But that's what you're watching, is guys kind of jogging a little bit and then doing static state stretching. And that wasn't the case when we walked in there on Wednesday. There was a few more very clear changes. We'll get into that in a little bit. But what they've installed, and this is something Dennis Allen talked about last week, and apparently this was a Darren Rizzi pushed for thing. He was the assistant head coach, so he had a lot of say in a lot of these, kind of background things and how you structure things, but it was Dennis Allen's call at the end. But they've added kind of an activation period to the practice, and I asked Rizzi kind of what that all meant, and so here's that answer.
Yeah.
Can you just explain what an activation period
is? Yeah. So, imagine you're going to work out, and you shouldn't just go to the weight room and start lifting weights, right? Or you're going to go and you're going to go jogging for the layperson. I don't do a lot of jogging, unfortunately, but I need to. But you shouldn't just go out there and just start lifting weights, or just go pick up a basketball and just start playing basketball. That's how you tear your Achilles, or that's how you get hurt, right? So the activation is more of a sports science thing. We take those guys through an activation period so that when practice starts, they're actually already, sweating, and they're already, have already gone through and warm. Activation is a fancy name for a warm-up. When I was growing up, we were in warm-up. Now it's activation, but they go through an activation period, and let the sports science guys and the strength staff kind of decide what's the best way to get those guys activated. But, it used to be something that was kind of voluntary, and then we did our stretch period. We made it a mandatory thing here just to try to change it up a little bit.
So yeah, I mean, it's really more of a kind of sports science driven. Like if you did track in high school, like I did, like we would call it active stretching. Like, so instead of kind of sitting down and doing these steady state stretches, which are kind of scientifically shown, like you should do static stretches post practice, and dynamic stretches, which is movement activities that kind of simulate what you will be doing pre-practice, pre-activity. And I always thought it was strange. It was like, hey, you have an NFL team here that's supposed to be acting in a way that is advanced. You have a sports science staff, but they're still doing these kind of like steady state stretches prior to practice, like, you would have done 40 years ago. And so that's gone. You're not doing that anymore. You are doing these kind of activation periods, which, we'll see if it helps. They're also going to do a focus on hydration and kind of inform people more in that respect. And so, again, I don't know if it's going to help. We'll see if it helps, but it's just a good indicator of like how quickly things have kind of been adjusted. And, I think it's smart. I think like if you're going to say, hey, we're looking at this, we're trying to fix stuff, change stuff, do things differently, find out what works. And so that's just a good example of one of those things.
I thought it was amusing too, that even just different sides of the field for the offense and defense has been changed. And Rizzi giving the shout out to Bobby Hebert in the clip.
Yeah, he did talk about that. And I asked Derek about it. And I want to get into that more in the final segment of when we talk about all the changes. But yeah, that is one thing that we walk in there and suddenly I get a really good look at the defensive line.
Whoa, right. They're not way over there.
And this is something that probably wouldn't have noticed. Now, they also hired Marwan Malouf, who's a special teams coordinator. He was a Viking special teams coordinator, and he actually was there when Clint Kubiak and Andrew Janocko were there, so they have some familiarity. He was not, he's worked with Rizzi before back in Miami and at Rutgers, so he's going to kind of step into the special teams room as a quality control coach and help out in that regard. John Galliano is going to deal with a lot of the special team stuff that is kind of now off of Rizzi's plate. But one of the more interesting changes, and this is something we probably wouldn't have noticed if they had not adjusted the sides of the field, because normally the defensive line is like way down there and we don't really get a good look at it. But Brian Young, the pass rush specialist, who's been here for a while, was leading the defensive line drills. And at first I was like, man, I don't recall Brian Young doing a lot of this stuff. And then it kind of dawned on me, Todd Grantham is not here. Todd Grantham was nowhere to be seen at the practice. And he may have been there at points that we were not. So I don't want to say that he was not in attendance. But, Rizzi after the practice said, hey, we are making some changes here. Brian Young is going to coach the defensive line. Now, they're not going to change his title. That might maybe next year, but he's going to be effectively your defensive line coach. And Todd Grantham is going to transition into kind of a senior advisor role for Joe Woods. And like you might look at that and say, oh, it's a demotion because the defensive line hasn't been working out. The way they're framing it, and then it makes sense, is like you look at the offense. Rick Dennison is here as kind of a senior assistant to help Clint Kubiak. You didn't really need that on the defensive side of the ball before because Dennis Allen was in charge of the defense and Joe Woods was effectively his senior offensive assistant. And now Joe Woods is in charge of the defense. And in firing Dennis Allen, you not only lost a head coach, you also lost a defensive coach. So you're effectively saying, hey, you're going to have Todd Grantham in the Rick Dennison role on the offense, helping out Joe Woods. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, and I guess that's where you're finding that extra coaching slot that Maloof is going to fill.
Right.
But it's just an interesting thing. And I don't know, it's an opportunity. And that's the thing for Rizzi. This is a great opportunity to kind of cut his teeth at the head coaching position in the NFL and maybe have a chance to do that. For a guy like Brian Young, I'm sure he wants to be a position coach. So it's an opportunity for him to say, hey, I can be a defensive line coach.
And man, Young has been with this organization forever.
Yeah, and he's big, strong guy.
Looks like he could still wreak some havoc for sure.
Yeah, and you look at Dan Campbell. It's like one of the things he talked about, Darren Rizzi talked about. He talked to Dan Campbell and guys like Todd Bowles.
Yeah, I thought that's awesome.
Even Chris Tabor. Because Todd Bowles was an interim head coach. Rizzi was with him in Miami when that occurred. Obviously, Dan Campbell, same situation, different time, but same situation. He talked to Chris Tabor, who was a special teams coordinator for the Panthers, took over as the interim last year. So I think it's a good one thing that Rizzi has made clear is he's going around and talking to everybody. He's having conversations with everybody. Every time you ask him about a player, he's like, yeah, I sat down with him this morning. We had a great talk. And whether and I believe him when he's saying that. Like, I think that he really is doing that. But the funny thing is he was asked about Dan Campbell and when he took over as the Miami interim, he immediately started doing like Oklahoma drills. And one thing Rizzi said was basically like, first of all, is anyone in here surprised that Dan Campbell is out there doing Oklahoma drills? And they're like, no. And the first thing I could think was like, I want to see Brian Young go against Dan Campbell in an Oklahoma drill. Let's see what happens.
Oh, that's a social media event waiting to happen.
Yeah. But I did think like that even that joke was like, hey, this guy's got a personality. And I think we talked to Blake Groupie, and that was one thing. He's like, he's got a personality. And when you hear someone say that, it's immediately going to be like, did Dennis Allen not have a personality? Right. And I just think like from a relationship perspective, and Derek Carr kind of talked about this. You always know where you stand with him. It's not a question. You believe him when he's talking. And if you don't know where you stand with him, you can just ask him and he'll tell you to your face how he feels about you. And so I don't know, like I just find Darren to be very endearing. And I think as people hear more from him, they will feel the same way.
Yeah. He's just more of that loud and kind of passionate coach that you kind of, I don't know, the stereotypical model. And DA was definitely a little more reserved and vanilla. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that just grated on people after a while. And, some decisions.
Right.
James Hurst on he's in his new role with, I think it's Fox. He talked about the week 18 thing last year. And he explained it the exact way that everyone assumed it was perceived. It's like he goes up there at the podium and he had the opportunity to just kind of back his team, back his players publicly, and then go into the background and just rip them to shreds. Because that's what you're supposed to do as a coach. Right. You're supposed to support your team, even if you're pissed off and you want to go and like you fully intend to walk into that room and ream some people out, even cut some people if you feel like that merits that. But like, don't go up there and apologize to the Falcons and undermine your own team. And that's what he did. And that's how it felt. And that's why over the course of time, you lose people. And
that was definitely the biggest error for DA in that situation. Like you said, apologizing to the Falcons, you're not going to win over fans or players with that.
Yeah, and I mean, someone who was clearly lost throughout the course of the season last year and kind of going into this year, Marshon Lattimore. Now you got him back into the fold, but it was very clear that he wasn't happy throughout the course of last season. And I don't know if you ever, like, everyone said the right things, but I don't know if they ever necessarily fully meant them. Like, it was like, This is what you have to say in this moment. Like, you're an NFL player under contract. But it was like, this was a long time coming, the trade that we just got. And, I think they got reasonably good value out of it. I know some people were complaining, only a third round pick. Go look at some of the other cornerback trades that have occurred. And you're looking like Jalen Ramsey from the Rams to the Dolphins. You're talking about a third round pick. The fact you were able to get a third and a fourth.
Right. That was like, all right.
And how Mickey phrased it, which I think is accurate, is like the way you should look at it is not, we sent a fifth back. the way you should look at it is we added a third round pick, and then we moved up from the 5th round to the 4th round.
Sure.
And now you're not going to move up that far because the Saints' 5th round pick is going to be should be pretty close to the top of the 5th round, and the Commanders' 4th round pick should be pretty close to the bottom of the 4th round.
Right.
But either way, it's still like that's how you're going to look at it. And then you got your own 6th back. So I think that people are like, oh, why did we send something back? I think you need to look at it more. Hey, we just moved up from that 5th round pick, however far, and then the 6th round pick you got back was your own 6th round pick. So that'll be a pretty solid early 6th round pick. But
no, I was definitely pleased with the haul. Obviously, you always want more for a guy, and especially you look at Marshon of who he is when he's healthy. But for where the state of he is right now in terms of health and just what we've been seeing, I think 3rd round pick and a 3rd and 4th is legit for Marshon in this.
Well, and it's like, and if we were talking about Marshon, who's playing at a Pro Bowl level and whatever over the last 3 years, we're talking about a guy who's missed 19 games over the last 3 seasons and is currently dealing with a hamstring injury. Now, I would fully expect that hamstring injury to be behind him fast. But I do believe he's dealing with a hamstring injury. I think the question, and this is what I told Tommy yesterday, is like, I think it's more about, hey, are you motivated to work through an injury when you're 2-7? Like how much are you willing to, like, when you talk about, it's a pain tolerance thing sometimes, I think your pain tolerance when you're in a competitive environment will be somewhere higher than it would be when you're in a non-competitive environment. And so we'll see. Either way, like, you're traded a guy who has been incredibly injury prone and has not really even been helping you this year. Even though he's been good when he's played, he's been out a lot of the time. So like, that's going to limit your return. So I think the fact that you were able to get a representative return for a guy in that environment, I think that's a positive. Like, I don't have any issue when people are like, well, they had a better 3rd round pick. I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the day you looked at it and they're like, hey, we could either give you the Dolphins 3rd rounder, or we could give you this 3rd rounder and 2 other picks. And if I'm the Saints, my goal is asset collection at this point.
Yes, sir.
So I'd rather get an extra pick or 2 than be slightly higher in the 3rd round.
Plus doesn't mean you can't package that pick you've got now, eventually on draft day, move up, whatever. But yeah, I agree with you. Try to get as many of that ammunition in your draft clip as you can. Exactly. And, the thing to think about after this, okay, let's talk about the cornerback room and how that affects it. That's something we can hit down the road. It's pretty straightforward. I think Alontae Taylor is going to stay on the outside personally, but we'll have to see. Yeah. A lot of it's going to depend on when does Kool-Aid come back, and when Kool-Aid is back, is he your starting outside corner, or do you then shift Alontae back to the slot? I think at this point you're better off seeing what you have in Alontae, but more so is the cap implication of trading Marshon. And one of the reasons that trading Marshon, while it made sense, it was always going to be, hey, this is a pretty clear sign that you're going to try to take your medicine a little bit from a cap perspective, is you're not really getting any cap flexibility for next year by trading Marshon. Like, you're basically breaking even from a cap perspective, but you are also losing $12 million in restructure potential that would have helped you. So you're in like the $60 million range, and there's going to be different numbers floating around, whether it includes Ryan Ramczyk or not. If he retires, then that's about 60 something million. If he doesn't retire, which is very, very unlikely, you're talking like 70 something million. But either way, you're going to have to clear that. And Marshon's contract was one of the biggest chunks that you could have taken out of that for a guy that you probably aren't worried about committing to for the next several years. Without that, you're going to have to clear $60 million with the other contracts on the table. And so the biggest piece of that pie by far is going to be Derek Carr. And I thought Mike Detillier broke this down pretty well on Sports Talk. So let's listen to what he had to say the other day.
And many years, the team would go to the Bank of Breeze. Man, Drew didn't hit his chest on it. But if they needed money, they restructured Drew's deal a little bit. Guess who's got a contract like that on this football team today?
Derek Carr.
Derek Carr. Like it or not, they're going to have to go to Carr to redo and to get under the salary cap. Either that or they'd have to restructure probably 20 guys.
Mike, I think Carr's cap hit for next year, if I'm not mistaken, is upwards of $51 million.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's the clear option for this team at this point. Now,
and for many people, well, we got to get rid of Derek Carr.
He's going to be here next year.
He's going to be here in 2025.
I agree.
I don't know what happens after that, but you're going to have to go to the bank of Carr to bail yourself out in 2025. That's just the bottom line with it. That's not going to change. Because when you've kind of kicked this money can over and over again, eventually that credit card bill got to be paid.
Yeah, and I think that sums it up exactly how it's going to be. Like you're talking about, you can clear $30 million in cap space by restructuring the entirety of Derek Carr's deal. You don't have to do all of it, but the options on the table right now, basically, and they could do some more complicated things, but I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. Like your two most simple options are either restructure Carr's deal and commit to him next year. And then 2026, maybe you could eat that cap hit and move on, whatever. But like your options are restructure that deal and figure it out with however many contracts it takes to get under that 60 million threshold, or don't touch Carr's deal and restructure basically everybody else. And that includes DeMario Davis, that includes Cam Jordan, that includes Tyrann Mathieu, that includes a lot of these veteran players, Taysom Hill, that who knows how long they're going to play.
Right.
And I think at the end of the day, you want a quarterback a lot more than you're okay being committed to a quarterback that frankly has not been terrible. Like as much as people want to complain and say he's the worst quarterback in the NFL, he's been fine. And I think you're a lot more comfortable doing that, at least I am, than saying, yeah, let's restructure Cam's deal and keep that money on the books for however much. These are the deals. Those veteran players are the ones I need to have flexibility on. And so you're already in a situation where by 2026, you'll have Marshon's money off the books. But I don't think there's any scenario that you look at it and say Derek Carr is not at least on this roster in 2025. You could say, hey, we'd be willing to take that money hit and still play somebody else. Maybe. But the idea that people are like, cut Carr, it's not happening.
I was going to say, just everybody, you got rid of Dennis. Now time to get rid of his quarterback, Derek.
Yeah,
that's just fiddling.
You can't do it. It's just fiscally impossible. Not impossible, but very, very unlikely. Because it would
eating a lot.
Create a scenario where you're trying to bring in a coach next year, even that you're not giving them a chance. And no coach wants to sign up for a scenario where they're guaranteed to go 2-15. At least not a good coach. At least not a coach with prospects. But one thing I will take issue with, and this is the one thing that bugs me, is everyone talks about the Saints cap strategy as a credit card. And that analogy just does not make sense. Because why don't you want to run up money on a credit card?
Interest rates.
Exactly. Because they're high interest. Because if I spend $1,000 now and I make the minimum payments, it'll take me 30 years to pay off that debt. That's not how the salary cap works. Now, if you want to come up with an analogy, a comparison, you need to look at it more like, okay, I want to go buy a couch. It costs $2,500, whatever. And you might buy a nicer couch. You might buy a worse couch, whatever. Say it's a $2,000 couch. And they say, hey, we can finance this at 0% over 5 years. So your options are drop $2,000 on a couch right now or pay the exact same amount over 5 years. Now, even if that's a 1% interest rate, you're like, I'll probably pay it now to save money. But it's not. It's 0% interest, which actually is a negative percent interest rate when you factor in inflation. And that's the case with salary cap. Like your money in 2025, so if you buy that in 2024 and you're paying it off in 2029, that couch probably costs more than it did in 2024. So you're getting a better deal on that payment because of inflation, because of whatever. You're still paying for it at the 2024 rate in 2029. That's a better deal for you in 2029. Same thing is true of the salary cap, because whatever you spend against the cap in 2024, the cap goes up every year. So in 2029, what you're paying will be a lower percentage of your overall cap. So that's what it is. Like if you want to come up with a comparison for financing something, it's like financing a piece of furniture at 0% interest. But that's why the credit card thing, it's like you're talking about this in terms that want to make it sound negative, but if I had a credit card with 0% interest, sure, I'm maxing that thing out because it's going to cost me the same. And a lot of times there's rewards. Now, I don't know where that factors in, but either way, that's the correct analogy. And I just don't get so tired of the credit card line, because because these cap hits do not cost you more down the road than they do right now. It's the same money, whether you pay it now or whether you pay it in the future. And in the future, you're going to have a higher salary cap and it's going to be a smaller chunk of the pie. So like, I look at it more as I am maximizing my money than putting money on a credit card. And you could say, hey, I want to just reset so that every year we don't have to make these decisions based on the cap. And I agree with that. I just want to hear the credit card thing go away.
I guess it's more that mentality of like buy now, pay later kind of deal.
Yeah, no. And some people would say, hey, I have the money now. I'm going to pay for that couch now so that I'm not worried about that $50 a month tax on my income for the next 5 years. And that's a fair assessment. All I'm saying is that's the correct analogy to use, not the credit card. Because again, if I spend $1,000 on a credit card now, by 2029, when I pay that off, I will have spent twice that much, three times that much over the course of that time. And that's not what's happening with the salary cap.
And this has been Managing Your Money with Jeff.
Well, this has been grating on me every time I hear Nick Wright say this thing. And like, you're a smart person. You should be able to figure out the difference between a credit card and 0% interest. Anyway, let's move on. One more thing before we go. Kendre Miller, hamstring injury. He's on injured reserve. Ross Jackson, who hosts Locked On Saints, he's also reporting for LouisianaSports.net, which is a new website covering Louisiana sports. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. This is where that is. You can find it on his Twitter account. I retweeted it. So if you follow me on Twitter and you want to go find it, that's a good place to go click on it and read what he wrote. But just to summarize, Kendre Miller could play this week. He can't play this week.
Right.
But he could play this week. And that's because the hamstring injury he suffered against the Chargers was not that significant. It was deemed to be a minor hamstring injury. Dennis Allen, noted Kendre Miller not liker, said, hey, we're going to put him on IR. And he doesn't feel like he needed to go on IR. Like, the medical staff doesn't feel like it's going to take him 4 weeks to get back. Again, he felt like he could play this week. He can't play until week 12 because he was placed on IR. And so
little bit of shenanigans on the exit of DA there.
Well, I mean, I think that's just a good example of like when you do stuff like that, your players are aware of it, and you're punishing a guy that you don't like. And when there is resentment within a locker room already, and you do stuff like that to a young player who has been one of your better offensive players when he's been out there, like, I want to see him. Like, you're punishing him because he got hurt. That's just such a bad look. And Kendre was clearly very willing to share that information. Like, there wasn't really any back channeling going on. Kendre, I watched Ross talk to Kendre. Like, he got that information from Kendre. Like a lot of times you'd be like, oh, it's probably his agent doing this or that. He's like, no.
That's what I figured.
This is this player sitting at his locker being like, F that guy. And, Kendre has to be like, and that's the thing, like, it's not all, like, there's a reason Dennis Allen was not a Kendre Miller fan. And it's because he doesn't feel like he's doing the work. It's because he doesn't feel like he's a pro. And that's something that Kendre has to be better at. Like, he needs to improve. Like, this hopefully is kind of a wake-up call for him. But at the same time, like, when you're a team that is without so many offensive playmakers, the coach actively robbing you of one who could be out there because he's mad. It's such a good example of why DA needed to go.
You mentioned, though, it's like obviously his feelings towards Kendre were, clouded from the start. Right in training camp, he was just aggravated from the get. And I don't know, it's just definitely a weird situation. Like you're mentioning that obviously Kendre and the probably running backs coach and the staff think, he's good to go. But I don't know. It's odd that DA pulls this card out. Is it trying to take a jab at the player?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, this is him trying to send a message, but like, it's not the right message to send. And you're talking about, hey, I want to motivate a guy. That is demotivating.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that, with a different guy at the helm and a better motivator, in my opinion, and a better leader, in my opinion, you might see a better, because I think he's a talented player. I really do. And, we won't be able to see him until 3 more weeks down the road, but hopefully he can get back and we can start to see over the final month of the season what this could look like with him in the fold. One more addition to the injury report that I want to announce before we move on here. That's going to be me. I went and I made the bad decision to go try to play pickup soccer yesterday.
Oh,
and
no.
I went down with what I am self-diagnosing myself as patellar tendonitis. And I think a big part of that is I did not go through my full activation period the way that I probably should have. I got there late and then I took a little jog and was like, I'll be fine. I'll warm up while we play.
Have you learned nothing, Jeff?
And I sat there listening to listening to Rizzi talk about activation periods and making sure that blah, blah, blah. And then I went out there and I didn't warm up properly and it hurts. I didn't even do anything. It was like the classic non-contact injury to the point that I was like, did I tear my patella tendon? And I was like, if I tore my patella, because that's what it is. Like I know where the pain is. It's not one of the CLs, right? Not one of the cruciate ligaments. But like it hurt, but not like I remember Victor Cruz went down when he tore his patella tendon and it looked like he got taken out by a sniper. Like that wasn't me. I tried to jog around. I tried to play through. I tried to play goalie, but I figured out quickly that I was costing us more goals than I was helping save. After like that third one where I got nutmegged, I was like, I'm not doing us any favors. And I went home and put a gigantic bag of ice on my knee. But I need everyone to know that I'm going to work back from this. I may be an IR candidate, not sure yet.
So are you questionable or probable for Sunday?
Oh, I'm doubtful. I'm very doubtful. Yeah. For next week's Wednesday pickup game, I would classify myself as doubtful. But
I was talking for a sideline on Sunday.
Oh, I'll be out there on Sunday. I'm not going to be as mobile. I'm going to have to wear my knee brace. We're going to work through this. We're going to do the work. We're going to do the rehab, and we're gonna see what happens. Same thing as Chris Olave. We didn't mention this. And we didn't need to do a lot of it. Like it's kind of what you expect. Darren Rizzi talked about Chris and said, hey, he's going to go through his process. It's going to be thorough. They're not making any statements on when they expect him back because he's going to see specialists. He's going to do whatever. They haven't said whether he's going to go on IR yet. I have to imagine he is because you need bodies. And the Saints signed a few players. They signed a defensive tackle. They re-signed Trajan Jeffcoat. And then they signed a running back named Xavier Valade, which I had to ask how that was pronounced because there's a lot of X's and Z's in there. So we'll see whether that makes an impact or whether they include those guys in the roster. But we remember Trajan. He got hurt early in camp. He dislocated his elbow. So it's good to see him back. It's good to see that he's still like on their radar. But it's
just unfortunate, obviously, for Olave and just devastating for the wide receiver group, man.
Yeah, and the question for Olave, it's not even a football thing. It's does he play again? Right. That's the first question you have to answer is, do you keep playing in the NFL? And I imagine he will. But, I mean, four concussions in 3 seasons. And people want to put it on Derek Carr. Like, Chris Olave's first concussion was a pass from Randy Dalton. Now, the one last year against the Falcons was a high ball to the sideline that it wasn't one of the ones where he got hit in the head, but he went down hard and he got kind of his legs taken out and went down his head. So that was a Derek Carr throw. Then his third one was a Spencer Rattler pass. And then he got speared in the head. So I don't know if you put that on the throw, but that wasn't Derek Carr. And then the big hit against the Chargers, he got thrown into it by Spencer. So we can sit there and say Derek's the reason. A majority of these concussions that are causing this problem occurred without Derek Carr's involvement because he also had one back at Ohio State. So you're talking about 5 concussions in the span of 4 or 5 years.
2 this season, right?
And 2 within a month. That's
maybe the specialist will be like, put the Guardian cap on.
Yeah, I think if one way or another you come back, you're wearing a Guardian cap. I don't see how you look around it. And I don't even know if the hit he took, the Riz was asked if he felt like that should have merited an ejection, and he kind of said yes without saying yes. Right. But
I hear I don't know if the cap saves him on that hit.
Right, exactly. I think even if he was wearing a Guardian cap, you take a crown of the helmet right there, and you're a guy who's prone to concussions. You could be wearing a full bubble suit. I don't think you're gonna end up getting concussed in that situation. And that's why we are not talking nearly as enough about the hit as we are talking about the throw. Because if you got guys headhunting, or at the very least playing recklessly, guys are going to get hurt. And that's why they try to take those hits out of the game. So we'll see. But you know, it's like for Chris, it is not about when is he going to play again. It's about
if
can he is his career over, and is it safe for him to play again? And so those are the answers we're going to get over the next few weeks. And that's what Riz said. He's like, I fully endorse like them being thorough and doing whatever they feel like they have to do, because it's more important than, you know, catching passes and winning games. It's just kid's life. So that's just going to be the final one.
And just, you know, disgusting when you see that hit too, that it could end up, you know, costing a guy's career. You don't want that, obviously.
I expect a massive fine.
Right.
And, you know, we saw at least one guy, I can't remember who it was. There was one guy who got suspended for a game for reckless hits and lowering his helmet on hits. And I don't know if Xavier Woods.
Right.
I know it's Xavier. I don't know if it's Woods, if I'm saying that correctly. But
double check real quick.
If, you know, that's the type of hit that, like, if he's a repeat offender, you start to look at, do we need to suspend this guy to send a message? Or if he's not a repeat offender, that would be, in my opinion, if that's the first time you've seen him do something like that, then that would be like, okay, we're marking that down. And if he does it again, then you start to look at, do you suspend him for a game? Because, like, again, it's just about being reckless and getting guys hurt. And
no, from what I saw too when it happened, Woods is a known headhunter.
Right. So it wouldn't stun me if, whether he's there at that point or he's getting a lot closer at that point, if hits like that continue, he gets suspended. But either way, we talked about it enough. So let's cut that off.
Get well, Chris.
Get well, Chris. Exactly. And he seems happier about the situation now that Dennis Allen is out of town. So, and so does his brother, who kind of feels like a surrogate for Chris's opinions.
I hope his brother's not hanging out with Mike T.
Josh Olave. It seems like they feel a lot of the same things. But all right, let's wrap that segment up. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. We'll be coming back talking a lot more about Mickey Loomis's interview on WWL. Who dat? Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. That was a long segment. We talked about a lot, but we're going to get into a lot more.
Less long? What are you talking about?
Yeah, right. That's true. That's kind of, I say long. That's just what we do. But anyway, so we should have talked about this at the top. We'll talk about it here. We're not going to do our standard preview pod for this week with the Falcons, because, you know, the Saints say this all the time. It's about us. We're going to make this about us.
Yes, there you go.
Would benefit one iota from bringing a Falcons reporter on here and having them gloat about how things are going so well for them. They're 6-3 and they're in control of the division. The Bucs are 4-5. Like, all they have to do basically is hold serve, and they're finally going to win more than 7 games in a season. And it's good for them. I'm so happy for them. But we know about the Falcons. We don't really need to go with, like, about Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Kirk Cousins and all these guys. So we're not gonna do our preview episode. If the Saints find a way to win, then maybe we'll get back to that. For now, I just want to talk about the fallout from this week and all of that. Again, I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe button. Leave us a rating. Leave us a review. Do whatever you do. All I ask people to do is, hey, if you could recommend us to a friend, to your dog, to whatever, that's as helpful as anything. So as always, thanks everyone for listening. But we're going to dive into Mickey Loomis's interview with WWL earlier this week. He opted not to do a traditional press conference. Instead, he came on with us and Mike Haas in a controlled environment. And he also sat down and talked to New Orleans Football, which is like, if you're going to do that, you might as well do a press conference. Like, because if I'm a TV station in the market, like, what the hell? Like, when do I get my quotes? But either way, we're going to go through what he said to us. And, the first thing we can do is, hey, let's hear what he said about Marshon Lattimore and dive in a little bit more on that.
But let me just say this. Marshon has been a fantastic player for us. He was a great draft pick. He's a defensive rookie of the year. The year that we drafted him, 17, and made the Pro Bowl a number of times. He's a fantastic player. He's a good teammate. I got nothing but good things to say about Marshon. Unfortunately, the last couple of years, he's had some soft tissue injuries to deal with and a couple other injuries to deal with, but he still is, I believe, one of the better corners in our league, and Washington's getting a good player for their playoff push here and their run So I wish him, nothing but the best. I really do. It was just it ultimately came down to a deal that I thought was, good for us, good value for us. And that's why we did it.
So, yeah, I mean, as we said before, this, like, people can quibble about the idea. Hey, I don't want to trade star players, whatever. And it's how the Saints have been typically. But I can't be mad about the deal. I can't be mad about the results. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Marshon can do with the Commanders. And hopefully he can get healthy and they can make a run. Because it would be kind of cool to see, and cool might be not the right word, but I would not hate to see the Commanders and Jaden Daniels and Marshon Lattimore come to the Superdome and win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, when the deal went down, I had immediate flashbacks to getting rid of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I was like, oh, man, they're not going to get anything in return on this. So I was way better pleased with the return on Marshon, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, CJ, in the CJ trade is a good example of, like, you definitely got a lot more in this deal than you got for CJ.
Oh, yeah.
But also the CJ is a good example of, like, hey, you got a 4th-round pick in this trade. CJ Gardner-Johnson was a 4th-round pick. So right. Getting extra bites at that apple, your hit rate in the 4th round is not particularly high, but they have had a track record of pulling guys out of those, round 3, round 4. They do a pretty good job with those picks. I would argue they do a better job with the round 3, round 4 picks than they necessarily do with their round 1 and 2 picks.
Right.
Or at least in the perspective of, I think their hit, let's put it this way. This is the best way to put it, that their hit rate relative to the rest of the NFL is better in the 3rd or 4th round than it probably is in the 1st or 2nd round. Right? Because your hit rate in the 1st round is going to be high whether you're good at drafting or not. Like, you can luck into good picks 1st round because most of the picks should be good picks. In the 3rd round, it's a lot more about the scouting than anything else. And I think that's where your scouting department makes its money in the mid rounds. And that's like, everyone has the details on all of these guys. Like, you can find guys like Alvin Kamara who are being overlooked in the 3rd round. And that's where you get, some of these star players that you can gain an advantage with, like a Marcus Williams, like a Trey Hendrickson. And when you hit on those picks, because even if you're bad at drafting, there's a decent chance you hit on your 1st round picks. When you can double down and get those 3rd round picks to hit, like you have with guys like Jimmy Graham, guys like Teron Armstead, Marcus Williams, Alvin Kamara, Trey Hendrickson, then that's how you rebuild. You're not rebuilding with a 28-year-old who's got 1 or 2 years left in his prime. And will make you better, but not good enough. You rebuild with the youth that you come in, they bring in and develop on manageable contracts. So I endorse it.
You mentioned Trey Hendrickson, made me smirk a bit just because I'm thinking this past week, AFC player, defensive player of the week, Trey Hendrickson, and over on special teams, it was Blake Gillikin. So I was like, ouch.
Yeah, and Thomas Morstead is still out there hitting like a 70-something yard punt the other day. So yeah. But either way, okay. So let's get into what Mickey said about Dennis Allen. And we talked about this on the pod on Monday. This doesn't sound like it was a Mickey Loomis decision. And, the reporting is that it wasn't necessarily a Mickey Loomis decision. And it's pretty obvious when you look at his statements. And the first thing he's going to go to at all times is the injuries. And I get that. But you're also in the building. You understand, like, the locker room is not in a good way. But that never gets brought up. And this is what he said about the firing, and also took aim at a column that we can talk a little more about.
So it's a brutal business. We've talked about it before. Well, it just is what it is. If you don't think it is, go look at any NFL assistant coach's resume, and you'll see probably 15 to 20 stops, and that's a family man trying to do things. And yesterday, after the loss on Sunday to Carolina, releasing Coach Allen, I know it was a tough day in the building. It is what it is, right? It's the inability to stop the bleeding, to turn things around.
Yeah. Look, Dennis Allen, I think, is a fantastic football coach. And I think anybody in our league who would talk about him thinks he's a fantastic football coach. He is. I think in this case, look, the circumstances, created the record. That's just the truth. And a lot of people don't want to hear it. I mean, we get silly things written like the players aren't parking in the right spots. I mean, that's ridiculous. Players have been parking out there for the last 15 years, because, look, we've got construction going on. We've got, 100 more employees than we had 10 years ago. That's just silly. And to equate that with discipline is silly too. I mean, we're the eighth going into this last game. We were the eighth fewest penalties in the league. That's more of a comment on discipline than where a player parks, for crying out loud. But it just gets right back to, what stares at you right in the face is that we've had an abnormal amount of injuries, including to our quarterback, and we haven't been able to overcome that. And so that puts pressure and stress on the organization, and ultimately it was cause for a change.
Steve, you're silly. That's silly. You're a silly man.
Mickey's going to stop coming on with us, I feel like, just because all these quotes he ends up putting out there ends up being social media fodder for days now.
Well, yeah, and especially in this case, because and this is just kind of a peek behind the curtain. This show is not live. The show is recorded a little bit in advance. So that's why if you listen to Mickey's interview on WWL and it comes on at 7:00, and if some major news has happened throughout the day, sometimes it's not in there. It's because it was reported in advance, because it's just easier to get it done and do it that way and whatever. But in this case, because I knew that so many people were going to be listening, I went and transcribed it in advance and sent it around to some reporters so that they weren't having to scramble and transcribe all this in real time. Because and Matt Paris for NOLA.com, he's writing a story on Deadline. I wanted to make sure that he had these quotes so that he could do something with them. But what it created was a scenario where everyone was geared up to tweet every single quote out immediately as they were said. Because all I asked them to do was wait until it aired before they started sharing. But it created a very, very difficult scenario for Mickey in this situation, because everyone had their takes on it.
They were loaded for Bayer, right?
And especially the he's referring to Jeff Duncan's column, which went out over the weekend and took aim at the parking at the facility, which I will say, since they sent out a notice to the players to say, hey, park in where you're supposed to park, they've started doing that.
Well, Marshon was one of the cars.
Yeah. It would be his car. I haven't seen his car. Although I do wonder, how did he get it to Washington? It's probably going to get loaded on a truck. It's a really nice Bentley. But and it's blue, in case anyone's wondering. It's a blue Bentley. Anyway, so Mickey wants to point at that and say it's not a sign of kind of a lack of discipline, but it's hard to look at that and say, hey, you can't get your guys to park in the right spots. Although one of the last things DA did was get them to park in the right spot, so I will thank him for that, because I don't think,
thank you, DA.
If you had waited until the Darren Rizzi era, I don't think that would have been that's the first thing he would have wanted to do, is to be like, guys, park in the right goddamn spots. But I just thought it was funny. But either way, it's so blatantly clear that Mickey wants to evade the idea that this is all on DA. And players have said it's not all on DA, whatever. But at the end of the day, your job as a coach is to motivate your players and to have them all pulling the rope in the same direction and feeling like a cohesive unit that believes it can win. And you can point to injuries, you can point to whatever. That wasn't happening over the last month of this season. And when you're in the middle of a losing streak, it becomes a lot harder to do that. And I think personally, that's when you find out whether you have a good head coach or not. It's not when you win a bunch of games and everyone's happy and hunky-dory and everything's going great. That's not when you find out whether you have a good head coach. You find out whether you have a good head coach when things are going terribly and he manages it and he salvages it. And that's what Sean Payton was able to do. It's what good coaches are able to do. It's what Dennis Allen was unable to do, at least this season. And when you look at the minimum success you had, which is going 9-8, followed by the blatant failures that have been had, that's got to be the equation. I think that's what fans look at. That's what Gale was looking at. And that's what ultimately got DA fired. But, the way Mickey is approaching this makes me wonder if there's more changes coming.
It definitely feels like that for sure.
Feels very defensive. Very defensive. And we'll have to see. But the way the thing I look at is, hey, go look at how the Pelicans operate. And obviously a different situation. Scouting in the NBA, personnel in the NBA is very different, much smaller roster. You need you one star in the NBA can change your fortune. You add a LeBron James to a lineup, suddenly you're a playoff team. You can't add one player to an NFL team and feel like that changes your fate. And we talked about this yesterday. The Pelicans, like when you lose one starter, that's 20% of your starting lineup. That would be like an NFL team losing 5 players. So there's differences, but just look at the structure of the Pelicans. And David Griffin is the executive vice president. Bryson Graham is the GM. Right now, Mickey Loomis is the Saints executive vice president and GM. So I think the most likely scenario, if you decide to restructure, is you just separate those positions and you make one of Kai Harley, Jeff Ireland, the full GM, say you are in charge of personnel.
Right.
Now, if you look, that's where the comparison kind of goes off the rails, because Griff is the shot caller for the Pels. Bryson Graham obviously has a big role, but the final decision gets made with Griff. And in this scenario, I think if you're trying to restructure, you're trying to make it so, that the Saints GM would have the final authority in most personnel decisions. So it couldn't be the same if your goal is to do that. But if that's what this Pelican, I mean, when you see the owner stepping in and kind of making sure certain things happen, it's hard to look at that and not say, okay, they're clearly doing things differently. And once you start doing things differently, where does it end?
My question too is, you mentioned GM. Obviously, you think about the scouting department. They have been hitting in the later rounds, not so much in the early. But I know Jeff Ireland's name has popped up, but definitely the popular one after with DA sent packing, the fans now were rallying. Obviously, get rid of Carr and get rid of Loomis. They're trying to check off the complete list here.
Yeah, and I don't think getting rid of Mickey is the answer. I don't. And
I think we've talked about, I don't think it's happening either.
No, it's very unlikely.
He's not leaving this franchise. He'll have another role somewhere.
Exactly. Like, I think if anything, you're talking about, we're going to restructure, we're going to do things differently, but you're not firing Mickey. But I do think that that's something that you look at. One other thing we can get into from this interview, and there's more of it. It's already on our YouTube channel, so you may have already watched it there. If you haven't, go to WWL Sports. The whole thing is there. You can also, I also posted most of these quotes on WWL.com, so you can go there, read them, listen to the full interview, whatever. But the one other thing I want to talk about is the head coaching search and how that's going to be approached over the final 8 games of this season. And Mickey basically said it won't be. And so here's that quote.
Yeah, look, that's not something that we're going to be real active with right now. There's plenty of time for that when the season ends. Our focus has got to be on our team, our players, our coaches, our staff, and look, it's you learn more about who you have and who the people are that you're working with in adversity than you do when things are going well. As much as Katrina and that whole experience was difficult back in 2005, we learned a lot about the people that were with the Saints at that time, and it drove a lot of decisions after that. And so look, this is adversity, this is tough. It's no fun losing games. It's I can't describe to you as bad as our fans feel and the things that they feel. Believe me, we're all feeling 10 times worse. But you can't just wallow in that. You have to get up off the mat and show some fight, and that's true for every single person in this building. And so we're gonna see what we got over the next 8 weeks.
Yeah. So much like previous coaching searches, and it's funny because this isn't the first time the Saints have had an interim head coach, because they had it with Joe Vitt in 2012. But it is the first time that they've had an interim head coach and not known who their head coach is going to be the next year, at least in the Mickey Loomis tenure, right? Because Jim Haslett got to the end of the season. You didn't have an interim that you had to decide on in the offseason. Joe Vitt obviously gave the reins back to Sean Payton. Whereas this time, you don't know what they're going to do after the season. That said, in similar scenarios, which we had last year, in the sense of you fired Pete Carmichael, and when you have a defensive head coach and you're hiring an offensive coordinator, that's not it's not like when they hired Joe Woods and you're like, okay, well, Dennis Allen is the head coach and the defensive coordinator. So Joe Woods is kind of like, whatever, secondary coach more so than a defensive coordinator. In that case, Clint Kubiak, you're hiring to bring in and rebuild the offense. So that's a very significant coaching search. And the Saints didn't start that until well into the offseason. And they were waiting out Clint in the Super Bowl, but people were complaining then. It's like, you're taking too long. And I think that's what people are going to complain about now. Like, why aren't you getting a head start? I tend to agree. I think, you might internally be coming up with a short list of guys that you want to look at, but you're not going to start this process in season, because I think you're going to give Darren a chance to kind of show you what you have. And the thing is, a lot of who you bring in as a head coach is going to be determined by what do we have as an organization and who are we keeping around. And I think his point with the Katrina season is good. Like, they fired Hazlitt after that season, but like how they dealt with a lot of that stuff was significant in terms of who's staying with the organization and who's moving on. And it's like, there's going to be candidates either way. It's not like if you don't start interviewing Mike Vrabel now, he's not going to be an option. You're not going to hire a head coach. Like, you're not going to, sneakily get like, oh, no one even had a chance at him because we got him first. Like, any head coach worth their salt is going to wait out their options anyway. So I don't see how that would benefit you, but you're not going to see the names crop up probably till, if anything, way late in the season.
I think it's the odds that have come out for some of the coaches have been amusing, and still ties with this Saints squad. Obviously, Aaron Glenn and Joe Brady in that mix.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. Although I do think I don't really want to go that route. I don't. Now, if you stuck with Darren, which we're going to talk a little more about, that's different to me, because it would be because you felt really good about what he did. I'm not hiring someone just because he worked with Sean Payton. I'm so tired of that. I'm so tired of the, hey, let's keep doing this. And it has nothing against Aaron Glenn. If Aaron Glenn's the best option, then go hire Aaron Glenn. But if he's being talked about because of the familiarity, I'm tired of that. I really am. Like, I think the general consensus is people believe Glenn's going to be a head coach eventually somewhere. Sure. I'm just saying, like, that can't be the only reason. Like, if he's the best option, it's got to be because he's the best option. Not it's the initial tie, definitely, for folks. And that's why people are talking about him right now. Right. Not in general. Like, he's going to be a candidate for a head coaching job, and he should be. I'm just saying, like, if he's your pick to be the next Saints head coach, it has to be because he's the best option, not because, we know him. Because I'm just tired of that. I'm tired of that idea. Like, we've moved on from Sean. Right, you don't want the boys club. You're just hiring a guy because, I know this dude. He's good. Exactly. And I think you get into trouble when you do that. And again, if he's the best option, great. But I need that to be for other reasons. And it'll be curious to me. I know he doesn't have necessarily, obviously, the experience, but does Clint Kubiak put his hat in the ring for head coach? Oh, we'd have to. Yeah. I mean, I think you would have to consider it. Right. But either way, oh, man. One other thing we can talk about here and then move on. Mickey was asked about Alontae Taylor in this interview, and I thought his quote was telling. So let's hear that.
Yeah, and look, I would say this, regardless of whether he's playing a nickel or playing outside, he's been fantastic this year. He has I think made not just an improvement but a leap, and I think it starts with him embracing whatever role he has, and then performing. And he's just been fantastic, and his attitude, his effort, everything about Alontae Taylor has been fantastic. And we got a number of guys in that category, but you brought him up, and I would echo that. He's really been fantastic, and we see it every week. He's been consistent. That's another part of the equation here.
Yeah, and so one of the reasons I think you feel okay with moving on from Marshon, at least I do, is that I think you have a true number one corner in Alontae Taylor. And I think what Mickey's telling you there is kind of feels the same way. And that's why when I get asked, hey, do you think Alontae's going to go back to the slot? I say no, because I want to see if he really is that. And I'm not going to, and I know what he can do in the slot. We've seen it. And the fact that he can play in the slot, great. That's going to benefit him financially down the road. No question about it. And knowing that you have an outside corner that can go into the slot at any given moment if you need it, that's a great advantage to have. But if he's my number one outside corner and I feel like I have that guy, I want to know that. And I want to find out this year. And there's really no reason not to. Because, before it was like, hey, he was competing for the outside job with Paulson 2 years ago. Like, you wanted him there, but Paulson won that job. And this year you had Marshon and Paulson. So, yeah, okay, he's going to play slot. You don't have either of those guys now. So if he's your best outside corner, play him on the outside. And if he's going to be kind of a cornerstone of this defense, which I think he should be, play him on the outside. And when Kool-Aid comes back, play those guys both on the outside. Find someone to play in the slot.
There's not many options for outside right now.
Right. And I don't see what you would gain from keeping him in the slot just because that's how you started the season. Like knowing that he can play in the slot and you have that flexibility to go inside, outside. Fantastic. I love that. And he's going to get a bigger contract down the road because he can do that. And because even if it's not with the Saints, a team is going to look at that and say like, wow, that's going to be really good to have. All that said, I want to know because you're in year 2. No, you're in year 3.
Yeah. Right.
You're going to go into next year. He's a second round pick. He doesn't have an option year. So you're going to go into next year and have to make a decision. Do we extend this guy early?
Right.
And if I want to do that, I want to know now. I want to find out now just how good he can be on the outside. Because I was really impressed. Obviously, it's the Panthers. It's Bryce Young. It's whatever. They don't have a great receiving core. How does he look against the Falcons? How does he look against a guy like Drake London? How does he look in those matchups? And you put him on an island, you see how he handles it. I want to see that. And I think the Saints want to see that too.
And I think like Alvin Kamara, Alante's been a good soldier. He necessarily didn't want to be moved to that slot role. He's like, all right, this is what the coaches want. Is always you've known, expressed that desire to be outside. So right now, what better time than now to roll with it, right?
Right. And again, the reason he's in the slot is not because he's the best out slot corner in the world. It's because he's a really talented player and you wanted him on the field in whatever way that looked. And at the beginning of the season, you had 2 starting outside corners, and that was where he could get on the field. Now you put him at his best position, and you see just how good he can be at that position. And I have really high expectations for what he can be at that position. And next year, I think there's on the table maybe, hey, do we bring Paulson Adebo back? Do we sign him to a deal that he can kind of build that value back up? I don't think he's going to, if I'm Paulson, I'm not interested in signing a long-term deal. I want to sign like a 1-year deal that's reasonable in market range, and I can build my value back up and maybe sign that multi-year deal that I was in line for this season. Once I prove that my leg is back and I can still play at a high level. And if that's the case, maybe next year you end up with Alante and Paulson on the outside and Kool-Aid in the slot. But one way or another, I want to know whether Alante is my starting outside corner or if I have to start looking for, the next iteration of that, because I don't think that I'm going to sign him to that big second contract. I think you will, personally. If I'm looking in my crystal ball, Alante is the guy you're extending before next season because I don't want to have to deal with an open market battle. And maybe he says, hey, I'd rather get to the open market and assess my value. But if I'm him as well, I'm looking at what happened to Paulson. And if they're willing to play ball and extend me because they see how good I can be and I can get that security in a year before I go out there and potentially suffer a major injury, which can happen on any play in the NFL, I'm doing it. So I think this last 8 games, I'm looking at Alante and saying, okay, dude, go earn that contract.
Be that cornerstone piece, right?
Because you're going to have money in 2026 and beyond. Like you're going to, and honestly, extending him prior to the season will help you salary cap wise with the, not by a ton, but it's going to be a benefit for you to get that contract set in advance. Same, they did it with Caesar. They did it with Pete this offseason. So there's usually, it seems like there's always like one significant kind of contract extension you can get to. And in that case, because he was the Trevor Penning, Chris Olave draft, right? Like you don't necessarily have to make decisions on those guys next year because you have that 5th-year option on the table. So you can figure that out. And a guy like Chris Olave, we'll see how his health is, but that might be the best option for him. So yeah, I just thought that answer was telling of like, this team really likes Alante Taylor. And I think that they have good reason for that. And, we talked about this, like next episode, I kind of want to do, okay, who are the players you're most intrigued to see showcase the rest of the way? And he's at the top of my list. And it's not him in the slot. It's him outside.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously the talent the guy's got, but also that leadership he brings. He is that voice. He wants to be the vocal leader. Not many people want to step up into that role, but he just has that ability, has that natural swag, whatever you want to call it, the way he carries himself. He has that follow me ability.
Yeah, and he's leaned a lot on Tyron this year. Like, he's gotten very close to Tyron Matthew this year. Mentor. Like, Tyron has given him a lot of advice on like where to live, how to approach certain situations. And so if he can, you know, and that's a good thing. If I'm a young player, that's the player I want to take my lead from. The same way that Tyron always talks about, hey, Patrick Peterson, my rookie year, early in my career, was very influential on me. And he's a big reason I am the way I am today. And I'm sure that's something that, you know, fast forward 8 years down the road, Alante is going to be the old guy in a locker room telling a young player about that. So yeah, anyway, that's it. Again, if you want to listen to that full Mickey Loomis interview, it's at WWL.com. It's on our YouTube channel. Go check it out. Mike Haas, I thought, did a good job. You know, those are uncomfortable situations. You got to kind of be, I don't want to say careful, but like,
you got to do the dance.
You frame those questions. You have to, because you know, you want to give him the shovel and let him dig. You don't want to just throw dirt.
Plus, you mentioned Mickey hadn't addressed the media, so Mike was the first person he had talked to. So that is difficult.
And I think he did. He got to all the points, right? He got to all the things people wanted to hear about, and so I give him credit for that. And anyway, let's wrap this segment up. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about some of the changes and why I think that's important, and also kind of make the case for why Darren Rizzi could end up being the head coach beyond this year. We'll talk about a lot of that. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller coming at you. This is Thursday morning before the injury report comes out. So if anything crazy happens, don't blame us. Either way, Inside Black and Gold. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller coming at you. And we made some changes this week to our schedule. We did things a little bit differently. And so that's fitting because the Saints did exactly the same. You know, and there's been a lot of different things that they have done. One of the things that Darren Rizzi did, he made the decision, hey, we're going to reorganize the entire locker room and we're going to move people's lockers back where they used to be before COVID. And that was in position groups. And so when we went into the locker room yesterday, everyone was in different spots. And it's weird. And if you know, people who don't cover the team might not realize this, but like, it's like you go in there and you know where everyone is. Like, right. It's you know, you've been in there enough times, like, okay, Cam's over there, Alvin's there, Marshon's over there, obviously not anymore. Tyron's over there, Alante there. Now it's by position groups. And I think that's how you want it to be. And the reason it wasn't that way over the last 4 years is because during COVID, they wanted to make sure that if like there was a COVID outbreak, that it didn't wipe out entire position groups. And I didn't even realize that. And I think Nick Underhill reported that the other day. I didn't even realize that was the case. I knew that changed, but I didn't realize that was why. And so like, it's just a good example of there are things changing. There are more kind of simple things, structural things, day-to-day things changing in 3 days under Darren Rizzi than there were, at least from a day-to-day kind of process perspective, than there were in almost 3 years of Dennis Allen. And it didn't really dawn on me until we saw some of these things change of like how much of what DA was doing was directly connected to what Sean had been doing. And I think, as you mentioned in the first segment, Rizzi made the joke that like, you know, I think we've been practicing in the same spot of the field since Bobby Hebert was the quarterback. And so what they did was they flipped it. So in the past, it was the offense on the far side of the field and the defense over by the weight room. And we walk in there yesterday on Wednesday, and it's the backwards. And the defensive line is right in front of us, and the offense is over down there. And it's just like little things like that. Like he asked, you know, players to sit next to different people in the meetings. Like the goal is to make people aware there is change and make people operate in ways that they have to do things slightly differently and make it feel different. And I endorse that. I think that's smart. I think that's what DA should have done from day one. And the reason you didn't was because there was the whole continuity idea. And right. The big changes DA made were staffing. Like he made a lot of changes from a staffing perspective. But even within those changes, you still did everything the same way, other than going out to LA for training camp, which obviously was a big change. But, Sean did that too. It was just a page of the Sean playbook of like, okay, we're going to leave for training camp. So even that wasn't an original idea. It's funny just how different, like how I didn't realize how much of it hadn't changed until he starts making these little changes that are just like, wow, yeah, you're right. That's something that has been done the same way for so long. We didn't realize why we did it that way. And that can be seen in the locker room and where they're like how they organize it. It can be seen in practice, how they do that. Yeah. I just thought it was interesting.
I get it right now. You need anything and everything to spark some kind of change with the results we've seen on the field, obviously. So whatever can work for this team. And yeah, Riz definitely has his own way of motivating, and we'll see. Hopefully that works. And we mentioned kind of last segment, wouldn't be surprised if he's obviously in the mix for this head coaching job next year.
Yeah, and so I asked Derek Carr about that because it's like just practicing in a different spot of the field actually do anything? Like, does it change anything? And this is what he had to say.
Yeah, that's a great question because I mentioned this to some of our players, on Monday. I was like, when you started hearing the rumblings that it might happen, I was like, well, we didn't know who it was going to be yet. And I said, well, whoever it is, whatever it was, whether it was good or bad, it doesn't matter. It just has to be different. When you come in the building on Wednesday, it has to feel different. There has to be a new energy because you go however many in a row that it hasn't gone well. Something that Wednesday has to feel different. And this Wednesday felt different. And it, just in my experience, when it feels different, does it result in wins and all that kind of stuff right away? No, but it usually results in good results down the road, And our plan is to make the good results now, obviously. But whatever it is, the feeling of the building, the feeling, the energy, the schedule, whatever, you have to start doing stuff differently, And he said, look, we got to do something different, and we all have to buy into that, and we bought into it. And when that happens, just in my experience, that usually is a good thing. I've been around sometimes where someone has to step in or something, and it kind of just stays the same, and it's like, you kind of, with the older players, they're like, what are you offering, me that, some kind of hope, that it can be different, results-wise, So just in my experience, like if you come in with something different and a plan that points to winning, that guys are used to seeing, like we've all had spurts where we've won in our career, and you look at it and you're like, that reminds me of that, and that kind of gives you hope back about it.
There's something phenomenal, like changing sides of the field in practice. Obviously, y'all are creatures of habit. Does that make it feel different, even if you're doing a lot of the same things? Does that change kind of your perception of how practice is?
Absolutely. Sometimes you can go through it, and I always say to like young guys, don't let it feel like Groundhog Day. You got to come out with a purpose all the time, because easily you can get into this, because it's such a long season and every Wednesday feels the same. I mean, I've had moments where I literally have deja vu. I'm like stepping on the same part of the grass at a Wednesday practice at that minute, at that, and it can be that way, and you can't let it get that way, And so, yeah, I mean, changing perspectives. And so, with Riz today, he wanted to change perspectives in the meeting rooms. He's like, sit by a new teammate tomorrow, like just change your perspective in the room, just all that kind of stuff. And so he's doing all these kind of things, and us as players, we love it. And, it does feel different, and hopefully it just results to wins, because like we can feel good all we want and and all that kind of stuff, but like our city needs a winner. And so hopefully that's what it produces.
And yeah, so, whether that actually does anything or not, I think it's a smart thing to try to do of like, no, this isn't the status quo. Things are changing.
Right.
And what Rizzi said earlier in the week is like, change isn't bad, change isn't good, change isn't better, change is change. And you don't necessarily have to have, you don't want to make changes just to make changes. But if the reason you're making changes is the way you were doing it before wasn't working and you're just going to try something different, then that's a good reason to make a change. and when you are buried in a 7-game losing streak, and like what Derek Carr said, it was like Groundhog Day. Like you don't want to do the same thing. Like you want to break out of that rut. And how do you break out of a rut? You walk in a different spot. You go like you're in a rut because you've walked in the same circle so many times that you've worn out the ground beneath you. That's how you end up in a rut. So how do you get out of that rut? You take a step to the left and you walk in a different line. And some of that is just kind of psychological. Like I don't think the Saints are going to be suddenly a better team because they're practicing different spots of the field.
And their lockers are all together in position groups.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think that there is actually, like the moving people around at practice, there's nothing functionally that's going to improve because you're in a different spot. That said, in the locker room, and the way Darren Rizzi put it is like, it's true. You come out of a meeting, all the offensive linemen come out of the offensive line meeting, you walk over to your lockers and you talk about what you were going over. Like you can easily just kind of communicate and be like, hey, I have a question about this, whatever. And also just from a team bonding perspective, like those are fun to bond with. When you're all over the locker room, you can't really do that. And now it's just a more cohesive experience.
I guess that could make it less cliquey, as you could say, like high schoolish.
Well, it's funny because I do want cliques in the locker room, but not in the sense of, okay, I like this guy, so I'm going to talk to him. I want position groups to be cliquey because I want them to be together and I want them to be committed together. But I don't want my cornerback, his only confidant is the wide receiver that, isn't really helping him be a better football player. It's just because they like each other. So I don't, but we've heard multiple people say the word cliquey. Foster Morrow said like one of the ways that you, in an interim situation, you succeed is you don't allow that to happen. And everyone's open with each other. And I think that's kind of the goal there. That said, there were more changes than just that. Like Derek said, this is one of they ran more plays in practice. Like it was a higher paced, higher energy practice. Said it's probably the most plays he's run in a single practice in forever. So, for a team that's dealing with all the injuries, is that a good thing? And we'll see. But, I think that's the idea is I just want people to be excited again. Like I want people to have energy and feel like this is different. We're not doing the same things. It might be a lot of the same players. It might be a lot of the same coaches, but we're going to find a way to create better results and doing the same thing and getting the same results. One saying I hate is when people say, what's the definition of insanity? And like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's not the definition of insanity. Google insanity right now and read the definition for yourself. It's not that. They are actually quoting Albert Einstein. And so but either way, like that's the idea. It's like, why would you expect different results if you're doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same way every week? Let's change things. Let's see if that spurs momentum. Let's see if that spurs team bonding, energy. And, we'll see. We don't know. We're 3 days in. If the Saints go out there and look like dog shit on Sunday against the Falcons, people probably won't be as positive about this.
Right. We'll be laughing about positions being next to each other and swapping field spots during practice.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
that's really going to work.
Good thing we changed our lockers around so we could lose by 40. But either way, like it's not hard to listen and to look around and see a much more excited team for what can happen than we saw last week.
I mean, it just sucks, Jeff. Obviously week 2, September 15th was the last time this team won. And I don't know, the feels were all high all around from everybody. And I know the injuries were an issue too, but there's so much seemed to degrade this team down and just suck the life out of everyone. And just looking for that energy, that kind of the spark, whatever that want to from this squad, because they don't seem to have it right now. At least the end of the Dennis Allen tenure. Yeah,
the longer you go without a win, the more impossible it feels like to win a game.
Right.
And so just, and a lot of that is mental. A lot of that is, hey, we are not good enough. We don't feel like we're good enough and we're just waiting to get beat. And so we'll see. It's going to be a tough matchup. Anytime you don't have any wide receivers right now. I guess one thing I do agree with Mickey about is, it's tough to win games when you don't have your starting quarterback. You don't have either starting wide receiver. You don't have you have your starting cornerback. And that's not. And I don't put all that on DA. I put a lot of the energy and just the team, direction on DA. But one way or another, you go into a game without either of your starting wide receivers. It's tough to win that game. But you can be proud of your performance in a loss, right? And you can feel like, we didn't get it done today, but we did all we could. And I don't think this team feels like that right now.
You mentioned Tyron being that, model for Alante, and just hearing from him Monday coming out, a lot of strong words, and basically even saying just, hey, I talked to, everybody, obviously the defense, we got Dennis Allen fired.
He also said like he hasn't felt like himself in 2 years. Like these are not the type of results that he has had throughout the course of his career. Like a lot of these players, one of the reasons they're here is because they don't know what it's like to be bad. All these Chiefs players, all these former Sean Payton players, like they haven't, again, like the Saints haven't won fewer than 7 games since 2006, 2005. So like they don't know what it's like to be a 2-15 team. So this is all new ground. But one of the reasons that, and this is how we can close out the pod. I talked before, like, hey, we're gonna break down. Okay, why would you stick with Darren Rizzi beyond this season?
Yeah,
and one is because, hey, if you get things going in the right direction and you feel like this is what things were supposed to look like, this is the image of a team that we were trying to build going into this year. And even if you win, you go 4-4 down the stretch of the season, but you're competitive and you feel like guys are bought in, it's going to be hard to tear that down because the teardown won't be clean. And so when you're going to get to the end of the season, you're going to say, our next quarterback or our next head coach, whoever is the head coach in 2025, like we talked about, he's going to be saddled with Derek Carr. And as you're going through head coaching candidates, how many of those guys are going to be like, okay, and how many are going to be like, nah? Because you don't really have much of an option. Because your option is do something else and guarantee you have nothing. Your cupboard is bare. And so who's a guy that's going to be willing to go with Derek Carr? Probably Darren Rizzi. Who's a guy that's going to be understanding of, hey, this is what our salary cap is. This is what our constraints are. Let's see what we can do. It's going to be Darren Rizzi. If you are the Saints front office and you feel like we like what Clint Kubiak did, we feel like we want to see what can happen with this offense over another season and with Derek Carr and with some of these receivers and with guys like Kendre Miller, Alvin Kamara, who you're committed to, guys like DeMario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, who you're committed to. Darren Rizzi makes the most sense. And I think there's a scenario you could work out with Darren of like, hey, man, we could do this on a trial basis. You're an interim and this went well. Again, if it goes terribly, no, we're not doing it. But if it goes well, if you guys are bought in and you feel like, hey, this is headed the direction we thought we could go going into this season, and you could say, hey, Darren, let's do this 1 year kind of trial basis. You will be the full head coach. And if it goes well, great, fantastic. This is not an easy situation and you managed it and you did well. We can continue this road. If it doesn't go well, and here's the thing, we're not going to lean in and buy you a bunch of free agents. You're going to have to get it done with the guys in the building and the draft picks we give you and this and that, right? Not an easy scenario, but one that I want a head coaching job, and we don't have to take our fifth best, or the fifth guy on our wish list in a season that they're not going to want to come here because of the cap and because of everything else. We can say, hey, Darren, we're going to give you that chance to coach over a full season, clean up our cap table in the process, and then go into 2026 clean. And you're going to get a chance to earn that job, and you're going to get a chance to lose that job. And one way or another, you won, because if you feel like he's the guy, then you found your head coach and you go forward knowing full well that you did what you needed to do. If he's not the guy, then you go into 2026 with a clean cap table. You don't make crazy draft day trades, so you keep acquiring assets, and then you bring in a head coach with a clean slate that isn't answering for the mistakes of everyone before him. So that would be my case. And again, that's all being stated before Darren Rizzi coaches a game. I just think it's like, if you get to the end of this season, you go, 5-3, 4-4, you feel like guys are bought in. And in this case, you're like, hey, he's still dealing with the same injuries Dennis Allen had. So if we're making excuses for Dennis Allen, you have to make excuses for Riz too, to some extent. Plus, I like Riz. I'm bought in.
I think if he can get this team to a 5-6 win plateau, you definitely have to consider it.
It's the same thing with Antonio Pierce last year, right?
Right, there you go. You felt that group of players rally around him, and if that happens here, sure, why not? Because
and the fact is, it's also driven by the fact that the way you manage the cap, and we talked about the credit card versus the financing, whatever. Here's the thing, financing a couch over 5 years, isn't necessarily a negative from a money perspective, but it does mean that, like, hey, 3 years in, you can't suddenly decide to stop paying for that couch. They'll repossess it. And if that's the case with the Saints, you're losing draft picks. That's where that analogy fits in. But so it's not like you can suddenly say, yeah, we're going to change course. We're going to reset. Like, it's a multi-year process. And that's why, it's funny because a lot of folks, when they complain about the Saints cap strategy, they complain about the wrong things. They complain about like this and this and this. And it's like, no, this is why you don't want to go this road, because when you get to a breaking point that you have to make a decision and you can't make it and you can't just reset clean, then it affects everything down the line. And what happens when you're like, I want that head coach and he will not come here because of the situation that you've contrived, then that's the consequence. It's not whatever Nick Wright thinks it is. And so that's why that would be my case of how Darren Rizzi becomes the head coach beyond this year.
He's got the personality. I've always felt he sounds, he acts, that demeanor about him just carries himself as a head coach. I figured this day would come. I didn't know it would be with the Saints, though. That's for sure.
Yeah, he didn't either. He didn't expect it to go this way.
This is where we are.
He talked about he's got 5 kids. They're all around the country. So one of them's a linebacker at Miami. One of them's a long snapper at, I can't remember the school, but and so he's talking with a lot of these people. He's getting calls from everywhere. Like, he's a well-connected coach. Like, he's been around the block, and a lot of the reasons I like Dan Campbell, and I think Dan Campbell is the right fit for the Lions, I feel the same way about Riz for the Saints. I just think he has that demeanor. He has that quality that you need as a head coach, that people are going to run through a wall for you.
Exactly. You have to have that quality where these grown men want to, like you mentioned, run through a wall, do whatever it takes. I want to play for you. We know Sean Payton had it. Hopefully the Riz brings the Riz back to this black and gold bunch.
Right. Because if you're full of shit, you can only sell someone a product for so long before they're like, this is not what you're like. This is not work. Like, I'm not buying this. I'm not eating this pie you're trying to feed me, because I know what's in it. And I don't get that with Riz. And so we'll see. And I think as Saints fans, like, I don't know how familiar Saints fans are with Darren. I don't know, like, the average Saints fan is not watching the Saints YouTube feed like a hawk and watching every availability video and whatnot. So I don't think that I would expect that a lot of Saints fans aren't familiar with Darren and aren't familiar with the fact that it's like, oh, this is what a guy with a sense of humor sounds like. And this is what a guy with a personality sounds like. And I think throughout the course of this 8-game season that they're going to look at, people are going to see those clips and they're going to hear from this guy and they're going to be like, wow, I like this guy. And I know you like him because he's from Jersey, and
Jersey pride, baby.
It's got a lot of Dan Hurley to him.
What too with it? It's like his voice. You feel like he's about to lose it, but I guess that's just how it is. Kind of like a Coach O, just the way he speaks.
That's just how he sounds. He sounds like he's always talking after yelling at someone for 10 minutes.
He just came off the field reaming out someone, right?
Doc Rivers the same way. Like, you would think he would go back 20 years and you would hear Doc Rivers talk and he would have bass in his voice, and like, nope, it's gravel all the way, baby.
Well, I'm anxious to see, like you said, the bullshit factor. I don't think is there with him. I'm believing what Riz is selling to right now. Obviously, Sunday in the Superdome against what a debut for him against your most hated rival that's leading the division, and you don't want them to sweep the series either this season.
And I mean, you want to, and it is perfect for him, because no one's going to blame him for a loss, right? Like, you're an interim head coach. No one's going to be like, I can't believe you can get this done. Get out of here. But you're talking about, and the whole premise of this is, how does Rizzi keep his job? How does Rizzi get the full-time head coaching job beyond this year? You want to get some fan sentiment on your side in this season, this terrible season of all the terrible seasons. You go out there and you beat the Falcons, a team that's so high on themselves right now, undermanned, with no one giving you a chance, and you go out and you beat the Falcons. Like, that's a good way to start that sentiment train, that hype train, kind of heading down the tracks, right? Then it becomes for sure. Yeah, why not Rizzi? Yeah, and I don't think we even need to preview this game again. Like, we know what the Falcons are. We know we don't need to talk about matchups. We don't need to talk about this. All I'm going to say is, hey, I want to see a team go out there and fight and look like, hey, like they care, like they're bought in. And because like Cam Jordan last week, I asked him if they were bought in. He was like, of course we're bought in. Like, yeah, okay, sure. What? Because that's not what it looks like when I see you watch out there. And like, it's easy to spot, and so hopefully, I hope the Superdome is excited. Alvin Kamara is going to become your franchise rushing leader. It would be fantastic to watch that happen as part of a celebration and not again. So we'll see.
Shout out to Haas too. You mentioned, obviously, we had Loomis on, but his other guest that was Mark Ingram, who talked about, obviously, Alvin getting set to break the record. Couldn't be more happy for his buddy. And I love how he's like, the thought was he could have done it against the Panthers. He's like, no, he timed it perfectly to do it against Atlanta.
Yeah. Let's wrap up this pod. That was a good episode. Get you kind of ready for the weekend. Get you ready for the Riz. Nobody beats the Riz.
Love it.
And we'll see how it goes. Again, like I like Darren. I'm glad he's getting this opportunity. And hopefully this season becomes a lot more fun to watch over the final 8 games than it was over the first 9.
Well, the first 2 were fun.
I don't want to talk about that. That was a different universe.
Mind erased. There you go.
Yeah. Zing, the neuralizer is the word you're looking for. Yeah. Put on your Merry Christmas sunglasses and it'll be good to go. But all right, who dat? Go Saints. Let's do it.
Nobody beats the Riz. Who dats?